What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are in our final week of Revelation for now.
Yeah.
We might hit it again later. Who knows?
Sure.
But this has been I have to say, and this isn't to hype up, but I've really enjoyed hearing the kind of angle you took with Revelation, because I think in some of my study and stuff like that, like I've seen kind of the practical side, but especially growing up, I heard a lot of the prophetic side.
Yeah, we
that.
all have been exposed to that.
So I think hearing it from some of the angles that you kind of preached, it was refreshing, but also kind of like thought provoking. So
well, I mean, you probably, we grew up at very different times, but I will say that was part of my growing up and particularly youth group years. And I think what was liberating to me as like I went to seminary and I started studying it was I thought that's the only way that you could approach it.
Right.
That was the right way to approach Revelation, from sort of this sort of end times, spooky, sensationalistic stuff. And that wasn't comfortable for me, I don't think. And so as I kind of studied it and saw the approach that I took with this, it was very liberating. And I think it was for people. I got lots of great feedback on this series.
Very good.
Even though it was a little heady, a little more academic than most series. We probably need to get started with this podcast.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Well, we'll get into it because I know you kind of broke this last sermon. You kind of combined a couple of them, or a couple churches. And so we got a lot to dive into. So let's go. Dave, we kind of hit the ground running real quick, so we don't really need to.
I do have to make a comment about your mug today.
Oh, okay.
A coffee mug, or is that water, or what is that?
This is water. I don't drink coffee.
Can you put coffee in it?
You can.
It goes with our set. I feel like I should get a matching one.
Do it.
Yeah.
I mean, this. I'm not going to lie. This is not mine. This is Rachel's. I stole out of the cabinet from her side, but
really, because it looks very masculine.
Yeah, but it's got the logo of the popular coffee brand. Are we allowed to say those things?
Dunkin' Donuts?
Oh, no, the other one. The other one.
Oh, the mermaid one. It's fine. I don't know. I don't think they're litigious.
No, it's good. And real quick before we jump into it, anything over the weekend happen that was fun?
Frankie and I are going to see Atlanta United this afternoon. So,
very fun. That'll be awesome.
That will be fun. Yeah.
If you don't know Frankie's our
production guy.
He
produces this podcast.
Yeah, produces. Our producer. That's the word I was looking for. Producer. So they're going to go see the game. That'll be great. Have fun doing that. I got to go to the Renaissance Festival yesterday.
Yeah, I've been before. It is fun. I bet y'all had a good. I saw some of the pictures. I didn't see your picture though.
I was there.
Yeah.
I should have made a shirt that said "Ye Old Pack Mule" because I had the backpacks with the waters and all that stuff for the kids.
Fun day.
It was good. Got to.
Did you eat the meat off the big stick?
I did not.
Yeah.
I thought about it, but since my surgery, it's like that would have been way too much food for me.
Yeah, it is a lot. Yeah.
So I think I found like a chicken wrap or something, which was much lamer than eating a big turkey leg. But Dave, let's get into this, because we got a lot to cover.
Okay.
Why don't you kind of give us a quick rundown of what you talked about, and then we'll go from there.
So we finished up Revelation. There's 7 churches in Revelation, and we spent some time in each church and the message to them specifically. And the messages are all nuanced and contextualized for a specific congregation that John was addressing. With this sort of overarching theme about where's your loyalty going to be? Is it going to be with the empire of Rome, with this emperor who thinks he was God? We're going along to get along with things that are, the opposite of, a Christian message where there is no gods before me? Or are you going to be loyal to Christ? And different churches struggled in different ways. Some struggled because they were compromising too much. They were giving in. They were going like, hey, what difference does it make, if we bow to the emperor? We know that Jesus is God, but we got to eat, we got to work, and we don't want to offend people, so we'll go along this way. And others were suffering the consequences because they weren't doing that. And so we had one of each of those in the last two churches that we looked at. Next to the last church that we looked at was Philadelphia. And Philadelphia, and I think the text that I sort of highlighted was talking about like, you have no power. And so, in being powerless is a pretty terrible way to feel. And in this society, in this culture, in the economy of that time, they were powerless. But yet they had the power because they had the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And so the main points I were trying to bring away from that, and I probably spent less on that than, any of the other churches, because I think the message is pretty clear, that God was with them, God had not deserted them, and, if they just need to hang in there and continue to be faithful, and God was going to bless them. But I talked a little bit about how in serving Christ, in following Jesus, there is both security and there is also risk.
Yeah.
Both in, not either or. If you're truly following Christ, there is security. Jesus gave us a lot of verses about security. Come to me, all you are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. So that is definitely the part of the gospel that, that Jesus gives to us. But at the same time, as we followed Christianity, we see the symbol in the middle of it is a cross. And Jesus says we have to take up our cross and follow him. Yeah. And so there's going to be sacrifice. There are going to be hardships. There's going to be times when we're going to have to take an unpopular stance on things that are going to make people upset with us. And so, the Philadelphia church was, one of those people that, they had taken some unpopular stances and chosen to follow Jesus in a very profound way. And it cost them. There was cost. There was risk in doing that. So
yeah. Every time I kind of hear somebody talk about this type of thing, I always think of John. I think it's 16:33, where it says, "In this world you will have trouble."
Right. Yeah.
It's just like, it's not candy code, and it's not like you might. It's you will have trouble, but the end of that is to take heart, for I've overcome the world.
Yeah.
So that's that. Like, there's the risk of following, but also the security of him being with you and beside you that whole time. And
yeah, nice. Yeah, that's right on. That wasn't one of the verses I put up, but I should have, because that was a good one.
It's just one that's always hit me. That's stuck with me.
Yeah. So, and then we moved into the church at Laodicea. And so, as I pointed out, Laodicea, all these regions that we were talking about, all of these cities had wealth. The Roman Empire, particularly at this time, early in the first century, second century, there was a lot of wealth to be had. The Romans had developed some things, including the road system. So you think about that. That opened up trade to happen between the East and the West. Plus, the Roman Empire spanned across those places. So there's no tariffs and things like that we would have. It's like NAFTA or something. And so they... a lot of the goods that the East had, where all these churches were, sort of right there, the gateway to the East there in Turkey. The Western world, which was huge, and Rome, and then up into present-day Europe, they wanted these goods. And so in Laodicea, they had lots of things going for them. They had lots of natural resources that they could draw upon to make them wealth. One of the things was there was a particular wool that everybody wanted. There was a black wool that was apparently very soft and very easy to shape and stuff. And so that textile industry was huge for them. But more than that was the medical community. This was, it was first century, but medicine was, and discoveries around medicine. I talked a little bit about pathology, because that's going to come in a little bit later in the discussion this morning. But they were understanding how disease worked, and it was the early parts of medicine, but all of the ologies kind of had their roots about this time.
Yeah, it really seems like
physiology, biology, anatomy, all this stuff people were discovering more and more, and because of the way commerce was, and also the way the communication could be across the Roman Empire, that was a growing trend as well. And so the Laodiceans, the Laodiceans, were very wealthy and had a huge medical stuff. They had medicines that were from there, particularly this kind of ointment that people put on their eyes. I should have done more research on that of what it did, but it was, one of the things they were known for. So lots of wealth to be had.
Yeah.
They had all these resources, but there was one resource that they really needed that they didn't have. And so you probably easily guess what that was, particularly if you see where they're located, and that was water.
Yep.
They didn't have any really natural, there wasn't a river that ran through it or a large river that ran through it. But the Romans had developed an aqueduct system, and so there was ways of getting water, and which is, when you think about it, first century.
So ahead of time.
Plumbing, it was pretty incredible at that time. It was a
I
great
mean, that's
invention.
why, every time I've heard people talk about Rome, they always kind of, it was basically the center of the world, the Roman Empire. Like,
It was.
all of commerce, all
Absolutely.
entertainment, like everything was really focused around
came
Rome.
out of Rome, and there, so there were, I've talked a lot about the bad things about the Roman Empire because of the emperor and the harshness that it was on Christians, but there were lots of good things that came out of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And, the development of medicine, was one of them. So, but they didn't have water. But they had this water running in, and not only did they have just water like out of a well, they had hot water and cold water theoretically coming to them from these aqueducts. To the north, I think it was, there was these hot springs, and so they had this water coming down the aqueducts with what was theoretically going to bring them hot water, and then they had this cool water that was coming up from another place. So they were going to have both hot and cold water, which is amazing. That
it really is
ingenious, except the fact that hot water that travels a long way, like 5 miles through an aqueduct, becomes lukewarm.
Yeah.
And so, and cold water the same way. It's coming up and there's, the elements and stuff. So the water, when it got there, wasn't particularly good. It was lukewarm.
Yeah.
And so there's a very famous scripture where John is confronting them, and he says, you guys, you're neither hot nor you're cold. I wish you were one or the other, but because you're lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty harsh.
It is pretty harsh. And I kind of wanted to ask you, what would be, in generalities, like, what would be somebody who would be considered like a lukewarm? Because we've always taken, at least, in growing up, as like, you don't want to be a lukewarm Christian. What does that look like? Like,
it's I mean, I think it's where we compromise in our faith.
Yeah.
And I know that's a kind of a generic thing to say. I don't want to get really specific in calling out stuff that I would see. But, I would say, let's take our United Methodist Church.
Okay.
I feel like when I was growing up, there was like this really high standard with coming to Sunday school, your attendance there.
Sure.
And I feel like it's going down a bad rabbit trail here. But there was, but along the way, you could get these, these pins, these Sunday school pins that people would get. Well, people travel. There's baseball and good stuff. And so, and other activities that kids are involved in. So attendance became like a lot less.
Right.
And so they started like compromising, saying, well, if you come once a month, or you go that. And so out of that, and I think part of it was like people are more interested in getting the awards than they are in getting something out of the lessons that when they're there. And so there is that downside on that side. But the other thing was we made it so easy to be considered involved when there is a standard of attendance. We worship God with our prayers, presence, gifts, service, so our presence. And so I feel like among those vows of membership, we have sort of compromised and let go over the years. And there, our membership vows ought to mean something. So maybe that's an example of how I feel like we've compromised and become more lukewarm. There's bad and good in all of that sort of stuff. We didn't have the competition back when I was a child than we do now. I mean, we didn't have Little League practice on Wednesday nights or Sunday.
Yeah,
we didn't have
they
games
used to be
on Sundays.
sacred
And now they are.
for-
And so that's sort of the culture out there. There's that very famous scene in Chariots of Fire, where the guy wouldn't run on Sunday and his race was on a Sunday, so he didn't race, And so, I don't know if that's a good example or not.
Yeah.
But I think it's things like that where
Maybe places where you're just kind of sacrificing your faith or watering down your faith to kind of fit into wherever you're going through.
Yeah.
Is that
Right.
like a general?
Right. Yeah. And, and maybe in our service where, we, when we look at part of our conversation is going in a few minutes of what Christian service is to to the least, the last, the lost.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think there's a lot of compromise there, and we do something to make ourselves feel good about something, but have we really made a difference?
Sure.
So
Sure.
I don't know if that's making any sense.
No, I think it does. And, it's always been interesting to me with this verse specifically, how it's like, I would rather you be cold than lukewarm, or I'd rather you be hot than lukewarm, because this center spot is not a great spot. And it's just always kind of sad when it's like, well, like, do they not get any credit for trying, or are they not trying? Do you know what I mean? Like, especially growing up, that's kind of where I saw maybe issue. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, and I don't know how that would have felt in their context.
Yeah.
This hot water should be hot. This cold water should be cold.
Yeah.
It's neither of those things. It's lukewarm.
Right.
It's only good for spitting out of your mouth.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's calling out like you're hot if you're doing this, if you're cold. It's just like you're supposed to be doing what you're supposed to be doing.
So maybe it's not necessarily relationship based of like I'm cold in my faith or I'm warm in my faith, but more of like you're supposed to be either doing this or doing that, and
you're not.
Yeah.
It's not producing the results that you're supposed to be.
Got it.
So anyway, that was them. And one other example I gave was he has a specific example about ointment. And they were known for these ointments, particularly these eye ointments. And he says you need to get this ointment for your eyes so that you can, you think you can see, but you're blind, and so you need to add that. So he's using, I guess, a point I've tried to make throughout it. Like he's using illustrations that may seem a little weird to us. But you can find what it is meaning for them.
Yeah.
It would have made sense to them, even though. And so because it doesn't make sense to us, we try to make it into something else. Maybe even like lukewarm, because we know what lukewarm is. It might have been more about like, it's not doing what it's supposed to be. It's not delivering what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be hot. It's not. It's supposed to be cold. It's not.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense.
Interesting. Okay.
And so then getting
with it.
into the part that I really have been looking forward to talking about, and that is like what happened to these churches in Revelation. We have these 7 messages, some very harsh, some more encouraging, all intended to give them hope and perseverance through this difficult time. So what happened to them? I mean, they've lost their leader. John has been cut off and put, in the Isle of Patmos. He can only write a letter. So were they successful or not? I mean, success in that, did the church stay alive? Did the church grow? Did they repent? And, I think the answer is, just particularly if you're looking at numbers, is yes. Because how do you go from just a few people, maybe 1,000 at Pentecost, the day of the birthday of the church, to it being half the Roman Empire by the 300s? How did you get there? You don't get there with lukewarm churches. You don't get there with disobedient churches. They had to have heeded this message. And of course, we're talking about the whole Roman Empire now. But the Christianity just took off in these early years. And as I pointed out in the service, they didn't have the things. They didn't have podcasts. They didn't have church buildings. They didn't have youth and children's ministry. They didn't have music ministries and screens and all. They just had this belief that Jesus is Lord, and this practice of sharing that love with other people.
Yeah.
And being, true to that. The Bible would come, creeds would come, church organization would come. But in those early years, they didn't have that. So how did we get from that? And so what's interesting is, as you read the history of Christianity, in the first century, the 100s, you don't have, most of what we have was written by Christians.
Right.
And so, it's coming from an angle. Mm-hmm. But by the time you get into those next centuries, you have other people writing about Christians and what they saw in them. We have other sources. And that's where it gets really interesting, because also about this time, Revelation's right around 100 AD. So like 165, I think, 165 to 185, there was a terrible plague that was all over the Roman Empire. It's called the Antonine Plague. I think it was something like smallpox. Okay. And about a third of the Roman Empire died as a result of this plague. Wow. And so people that had means got out of the cities and the urban spaces. They would have left places like Laodicea and Philadelphia, and those they would have deserted and gone to the hills to save their lives. Other people, when they saw their family members get them, there's accounts of them like, I'm sorry, you're running a fever, you're out the door. So your son, your daughter, your grandfather, out the door, because they were scared for their lives.
Yeah.
And so the Christians, however, stayed with them. The Christians did not leave the cities. The Christians stayed and witnessed and took care of those that were hurting and dying. And many Christians then got the disease and died themselves. But there's a lot of historians that point to that was sort of the turning point in Christian history, is that people saw in them, if they were looking at the pagan gods, the Roman gods, the Greek gods, there wasn't a really clear reason for suffering. Yeah. But in the Christian faith, we've got verses like what you've said. You're following Jesus. There's going to be suffering, but you're going to overcome the world. So there was a reason there, and there's some other sociological reasons why, but nothing changes a life like someone caring for them the way that they were cared for, and so by the early 300s. The first thing that happened was the Edict of Milan with Constantine, and it made it legal to be a Christian. It had been, legal to be a Christian up to that time. By 325, Constantine had brought together, a group, and they formed the Nicene Creed, and really began you see the organization of the church, the beginning of the codifying of the scriptures started happening. That's Christianity is getting more organized at this point because it's now legal. And then by, I think, 380, 385, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And so you've gone from this really, really dark time that we read about in Revelation. We've gone from 1,000 people at the day of Pentecost. Yeah. Then we've gone into this dark time in when Revelation was written, to it being the dominant force in the Roman Empire, and then, in Western history. Yeah. And so... I think there's lessons for us to learn in that about what is it really going to make a difference with our faith is how we care for other people and take care of other people, particularly those who are hurting.
Yeah. And, I love kind of how you led into that as they didn't have all this stuff that we have. They didn't have these mediums that we're using today to minister and stuff like that. And that's not saying these mediums are wrong or bad or whatever, but what it is saying is that those people were people of action and living it out, and going into the people who needed them the most and meeting them where they were. You know what I mean? That is paramount. That's huge stuff. And I think if we took that part very seriously, I think it could happen again. You know what I mean? But I think sometimes, and I'm talking to myself, is sometimes I feel satisfied with church being my faith component. You know what I mean? But I also have done this long enough that it's this can't be it. This part, I I need to be putting myself out in spaces where I can talk to people, because it's like, I've always kind of explained, it's like, if I had the cure for cancer, would I keep it, just share it with the few people close to me, or would I try to find a way to get it out to everybody?
Yeah.
And at least I'd hoped I'd try to find a way to get it out to everybody. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah. I think one of the things that we can learn from history, though, this early period of time when the church was really exploding and it was very pure, it was underground, it was illegal, it was oppressed, and the church thrived in that. When the church got power, and there's no power like being the official religion of the Roman Empire, from that point on, you see a lot of this lukewarmness. You see a lot of the corruption that took place. And, it had its peaks and valleys where it was really corrupt and then it got better. And then there was Reformation and it got better. But I think one thing for us to take from this is that, like, I think always want to be, our preference is to be in a position of power. And I'm not really sure that's the best thing.
Yeah.
I think it's much better for us to be in a position of not getting involved with the empire part of things, but working directly with the people who are hurting.
Yeah.
And not, it probably takes both. But
that was basically the example of Jesus, right? I mean, he stayed fairly humble.
Right, yeah. And so I don't know, but it was, it was a good way to end the series. It was a great day in worship today, baptism and communion and all. And the one thing that they did have was Holy Communion.
Yeah.
From the very beginning. That was something they did in practice, remembered. And so it was really good for us to follow on this Sunday so that we could end by, where it all kind of began.
Kind of unites us with those times.
Yeah,
for
sure. Yeah.
Well, Dave, I think we are here kind of at this time of wrapping up. Is there anything that you'd like to say last about Revelation?
I'm looking forward to this next series too, because the name of the series is Storyteller. Always have to have a name to a series, but basically we're looking at the parables of Jesus this summer. And there's like 70 something parables. We won't get near to all of them, but we'll get to some of the main ones, maybe a few obscure ones thrown in here and there. But I think it'll be a good summertime thing to do because everybody likes a good story. And Jesus told a bunch of good ones. And, some of them are hard to understand. Some of them are painfully obvious and we need heed. So we'll be looking at that starting next week.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching in, tuning in. You guys have been rocking with us for a while. If you have any comments, you know where to drop them. There's a comment section below the Facebook and below the YouTube posting. You can drop them either place. We'll try to get back to you. As always, if there's anything we can pray for you about, if there's anything you need to talk through, you can always shoot me or Dave an email. We'd love to have that chance to chat with you. But without further ado, we'll catch you guys next time.
God bless you guys.